This is Sony ZV-E10 Mark II, and it has all the upgrades we wanted on ZV-E10. This thing has 26 megapixel Exmor CMOS back illuminated APS-C size sensor, and it is powered by the Bionz XR processor. It can shoot videos up to 4K 60 frames per second in 10-bit 4:2 in H.264, H.265, and in all intra. When it comes to slow motion, in Full HD you can shoot up to 120 frames per second with auto exposure and autofocus. It can shoot in S-Cinetone S-Log3, and as you can see, it has the new menu system. It shoots 4K oversampled from 5.6K. It has features like focus breathing compensation. It has variable shutter. It has focus mapping. You can import up to 16 LUTs. It has 759 phase detection autofocus points, and it can focus on human, animal, and birds' eyes. And it has a new active stabilization mode. Overall, the entire camera, especially compared to ZV-E10, feels so much better. The quality of the material feels so much better. This grip is bigger, and that is because now we have the Z battery in this. What that also means is the memory card is not roommates with the battery now. It moved into its single studio. Next to microphone in, USB-C port that supports power delivery, headphone out, and micro HDMI port. The shoe mount has MI support, and the camera comes with its own wind diffuser. The buttons are nice. On-off button placement on the shutter button is great. It has a tally lamp. The photo video SNQ switch is firm. The buttons at the backside are the same as the previous generation, but the 3-inch vari-angle LCD monitor is now 1 million dot instead of 921,600 dots. However, it doesn't have the front dial that we have on A6700. Sony ZV-E10 Mark II costs $999 US, which is $300 more than ZV-E10. If you buy it with this new 16-50 f3.5 to 5.6 lens, it costs $100 more. Under streaming, you can see now we have two different versions of streaming. One of them is USB streaming that we know and love. That is when you connect this camera to a computer, it acts like a webcam. And the other one is network streaming, which is basically live streaming. This thing is compact and light, just like ZV-E10. It's a little bit heavier. It has the 3-capsule microphone on it, which works directionally. If you set it to auto, it records towards you when it sees a face, and when you hold it like this, the microphone switches back to you, so it records your voice, or you can select a directional microphone capture as well. Okay, now let's test out the directional microphone. Right now I'm talking from in front of the camera, so I'm guessing the microphone should be switched to the front, so the water back here should be sounding less. But if I turn the camera around and I keep on talking, let's see what happens. So right now I am still talking. Let's adjust our shutter variable ND a little bit. Yeah, this is good. So how does the voice sound? So now what I want to do is I want to change this manually to front. Right now it's set to front. What happened to the fountain sound? Is the fountain sound higher right now? Is the fountain sound lower right now? Let's switch to all directions. Now it should be same. No matter what I do, it should sound the same. Now it's set to rear. Right now I must be a little bit muffled and the fountain must be louder. But when I do this, the fountain must be quieter and I must be louder. If you are seeing any blackness around the corners when I shake the camera, it's because I have this huge ND filter attached to it, and I don't think the step-up rings were nice enough to avoid this stuff. So when I shake it, the corners get into the frame. So if you're seeing that, that's because of that. As usual, we have features like background defocus, which is great if you don't want to mess with settings and just click on one button and have everything in the background in focus. Okay, right now I set everything to auto. So now I want to try the background autofocus. Boom, defocus. Boom, clear. Defocus. Clear. It looks like it's doing so much nicer than before. Previously there was a little bit of change in the adjustment. You were able to tell that the and the ISO jumps to 5000. ISO goes back to 640, 300, 200. We also have product showcase mode, which turns off eye autofocus. So as soon as you lift something up, the camera focuses to that without covering your eyes. See, right now I'm shooting with FX3, and if I don't cover my eyes, the focus stays on my eyes. See? I think while you're recording, you still cannot turn on the product showcase mode. You gotta stop recording. So now, if something is closer, it immediately focuses to that, and it has to be in this area. So let's say I'm talking about this lens. As soon as I hold this lens up, even though my face is in there, it's gonna focus to that lens. We have cinematic vlog setting. This is the cine vlog mode. I picked S-Cinetone with the forest mood. Once again, walking around with the camera in my hand. And this is what it looks like. Easy peasy. It puts the bars there. There's no getting rid of the bars. On the recording screen, we also have the slide in for the extra menu. But now what we have is when you hold it sideways, the icons turn sideways too. But unfortunately, if you're wearing polarized sunglasses, when the camera is in vertical mode, it gets blocked and you cannot see the screen. This is not an issue when it comes to products like FX3. No matter what angle you hold the camera while wearing polarized sunglasses, you see the screen. But on this one, it gets blocked. So if you're outside where it's super bright, you're gonna find another pair of glasses if you're like me and then you like to wear polarized sunglasses. I think this camera is going to do to FX30 what ZV-E1 did to FX3. This is a really good and cheap alternative to FX30, but you have to be really careful about, for example, overheating. Unfortunately, when it comes to overheating, the results were not that good. Even when the auto power off temperature is set to high, the longest I was able to record was one early morning when the living room was cool. I was able to record in 200 megabits per second 422 10-bit 4K 60 frames per second video up to 29 minutes. However, after the living room got warm, that recording time went down to 10 to 12 minutes. Needless to say, I waited between these shots for hours for the camera to cool down properly, and I hit record right after I turn on the camera. When you leave the camera on, the camera heats up, which may cause even shorter record times. Then I tried lowering the image quality, and in 45 megabits per second 420 10-bit 4K 60 frames per second, I was able to record up to 33 minutes. When it comes to 4K 24, in the highest quality settings during the daytime, I was able to record up to 66 minutes. So if you're planning to do long recordings with this camera, make sure to test to see how it performs in your own environment first. And when it comes to rolling shutter compared to ZV-E10, ZV-E10 Mark II performs much better in 4K 24 frames per second. And when we switch to 4K 60 frames per second, the rolling shutter seems to be around the same. Well, hello there! This is Future Farooq. I was editing this video, and in this section we were going to talk about crop, but what happened was when I was doing my test, I was filming towards my studio and my computer was on, but I didn't realize that I had my messages and my email on the screen, so because I cannot show that to you, now we're going to demonstrate here. I sent the camera back. We don't even have the camera, but I have the numbers. So I'm going to demonstrate it to you over here, and we're going to talk about what is happening with this camera. So let's say this is 4K 24 frames per second, and this is the frame we get without active stabilization and without focus breathing compensation. When you switch to 4K 60 frames per second, there's only 6% crop. This is great because the first generation ZV-E10 didn't even have 4K 60 frames per second. And sometimes when you get a camera and switch to 4K 60 frames per second, there is an APS-C crop, which is a lot more substantial compared to the 6% crop. So it is great that on this camera, we have 6% crop when we switch to 4K 60 frames per second. It is very nicely done. Now, the new active stabilization mode adds a crop into the footage as well because it's done electronically. It's not done in the body because this camera does not have in-body image stabilization. That adds 25% crop to the footage. So if you're in 4K 24, if you don't change the lens, if you don't change the distance from your camera, it's gonna become like this, follow the lines on the screen. And if you're in 4K 60, it's gonna crop like this. Now, I personally do not like electronic image stabilization crop in 25%. I think that is way over the top. I personally like something between 9 to 12%, which gives you enough blur and enough stabilization to keep your shutter speed at the normal level. What do I mean by that? Well, when you're walking around with your camera, because the camera is shaking, the footage is blurred in those seconds. When electronic image stabilization fixes that, the footage looks stabilized, but the sharpness goes away because it is blurred. So how do you get over that? You have to crank up your shutter speed. But then the footage does not look cinematic enough in my taste. So I personally prefer something between 9 to 12, as I mentioned before. And if I want a gimbal-like footage, I would put the footage into the computer, throw it into Catalyst Browse or Catalyst Prepare, and just stabilize it there. Check this out. This is Catalyst Browse. What Catalyst Browse does is you bring in your footage shot on Sony cameras, and if it has gyro data stored into it, you can stabilize it right here with the values you set. Let's first look at the video without the stabilization. This is something I can do with this lens because this lens has OSS. This is a shot with the lens that has OSS, so it's a little stabilized, but as you can see, there's still a lot of shakeage happening. So if I go to this, and let's change this to 25, which is how much crop it applies when you turn on the stabilization on the camera itself. As you can see in the comparison, it is a lot more stabilized, of course, but we cropped in like crazy. And here's what I like. 9%. Let's go back here. There's still a little bit of shake, but we are not that much cropped in, so we didn't also lose image quality. And when the camera is shaking, the stabilized footage doesn't look blurry because the stabilized footage is shaking a little bit as well. So I wish there was an option to dial down this 25%, 24.5 to be exact, stabilization down a little bit. Maybe with a firmware update, we'll get that. This camera does not have a mechanical shutter. It only has electronic shutter. So if you're gonna do stuff that's gonna require mechanical shutter, keep that in mind, but also I have to remind you that this has variable shutter speed. So if there's any banding that you're worried about, you can have the time value read with this camera and then apply a shutter speed according to that. A lot of the Sony cameras lately have the AI capabilities. This does not have the AI capability. This doesn't have the dedicated AI processor in it. So all the stuff that comes with the AI processing that the other Sony cameras have, this one does not have it. I wish it did. It would have been great, or at least some sort of it. But no, so you cannot register faces to keep the focus on that face and have a crazy autofocus following not just face and the eye, but the entire body. It understands the body, you know how it follows that. So there's none of that on this camera. My biggest concern is overheating when it comes to this camera. So far that I've been shooting under the sun that is scorching hot, I haven't experienced any overheating yet, but the camera feels warm in my hand. So I don't know. Also, we're shooting only 4K 24 right now, not 4K 60. But wait, there's more. Now there is this lens. This is Sony PowerZoom 16 to 50mm f3.5 to f5.6 OSS Mark II. And this lens is only 107 grams. You can zoom in and zoom out using this ring. You can zoom in and zoom out using the lever over here. or you can zoom in and zoom out using this. Okay, right now everything's set to auto. The camera is handheld, and we're using the new lens, and this is what it looks like. This is all the way zoomed out right now, but the stabilization is turned off. So what I can do is I can go here and I cannot turn the stabilization while we're recording. Hold on. I turn the stabilization to standard. This is something I can do with this lens because this lens has OSS. If your lens doesn't have OSS, since this camera doesn't have in-body image stabilization, you cannot have the standard. You either have no stabilization or active stabilization, which has a lot of crop. So this is how it is, and if I want to zoom in, I can zoom in like that. Zoom out. This is my arms extended, but it's not bad, I guess. There's no filter on it, there's no anything, there's no microphone. This is the bare camera. I'm recording, we're walking around. This is what it is. When you're shooting in S-Log3, the ISO starts at 800 and then the switch happens at 2500 according to my tests. One of the things I realized now when you hit this trash button here, it gives you two options. One of them is add to my menu and the other one is in camera guide. I use the in camera guide quite a lot about the things I don't know what they are. But add to my menu is great because while you're scrolling down the menus and see what's in the camera, if you see something you like, you can just add it to your own menu without going to your add to my menu and then go back and find that item. You can just add it to my items library. This sentence is getting complicated by the second. The grip on this camera feels really good. It's because it's so light, you can carry it in your hand without a problem, and it has a texture on it that just makes the camera sit in your hand. That's, I think, why it separates itself from the previous generation. This camera really feels a lot better in hand compared to the first generation, the Mark I ZV-E10. I like what Sony is doing here. Usually up until Sony ZV-E1, the ZV series was, you know, it was the vlogger, but no one cares about vloggers series of cameras. With this one, it kind of shows that now they're taking this seriously and they're bringing in the features all the vloggers want. I like this camera. I enjoy this camera. However, I had a little bit of problem with overheating. Since we solved this problem with FX3 and FX30, we can have that, you know, little bit of grill over here to let the air out. I don't know why these cameras, this and ZV-E1, I don't know why they don't have that little cooling system so these cameras can run even longer. Well, thank you very much for watching this episode, and I hope you enjoyed it. This time we weren't at the beach, even though there's a new camera, but it is what it is. What do you think about Sony ZV-E10 Mark II? Is this a camera that you're interested in? Is this a camera that you think replaces the ZV-E10 nicely? Are you going to pick this up? What are your thoughts? Did this camera get you excited? Let me know in the comment section below. And until I see you the next time, take really good care of yourselves. And hoşça kalın. Now I gotta rush and return this camera to Sony. It's going back right now. It should go back. Yeah, right now. Okay.